Good evening, councillors. Let's make a start. My name's Patrick Hall. I'm the Mayor of the City of Canning at 6 p.m. on Tuesday, the 11th of October 2022. And for those that are here and also those at home through audio streaming, I welcome you to this evening's agenda briefing session. At item 1, declaration of opening, I declare the agenda briefing open at 6 p.m. We start, of course, by acknowledging the Whadjuk people, the traditional custodians of the land, and we also pay our respect to elders both past and present. In accordance with City of Canning Policy CM 105, agenda briefings are conducted for the purpose of providing elected members with a forum to ask questions of the City's administration and to receive answers to those questions to enable informed decision-making by Council at the following week's ordinary Council meeting. In accordance with the Local Government Act of 1995, agenda briefings are not decision-making forums. Questions may be asked and answered, and there is to be no debate or discussion. Questions must specifically relate to the item being discussed. Elected members and employees must disclose any financial, proximity or partiality interest they have in an item to be discussed and declare the nature of that interest at the commencement of the briefing or at the latest when the item is about to be discussed. If a member or employee has a financial, proximity or partiality interest in a matter arising during discussion, the nature of that interest must be disclosed as soon as possible after the matter has been raised. Interests are to be disclosed in accordance with the provision of the Local Government Act 1995 as they apply to council meetings. Individuals disclosing an interest other than a partiality interest must not participate in that part of a briefing relating to their interest and must leave the meeting room whilst the item is under discussion. Agenda briefings are public meetings and any information provided to this meeting by attendees may be publicly accessible. May I ask everyone here this evening to please make sure your mobile phones are turned off or at least on silent for the duration of this meeting. Cameras have been recently installed in the chambers which will enable video recording of this meeting to be live streamed via the City's YouTube channel. Thank you. We move to item 2, attendance. Apologies tonight have been received from Councillor Sweeney, who is not able to be here. Approved leave of absence, there are none. Disclosures of interest. CEO Michael Littleton, do we have any disclosures of interest?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. We have no disclosures of financial interest. We have one disclosure of interest affecting impartiality from Deputy Mayor Ben Kunza. It is in relation to item CO 01422, the nature of his association being I have previously been a long-time member of both the First Riverton Scout Group and the Linwood Ferndale Football Club respectively. Both clubs have leases on facilities at Ferndale Reserve. I have also previously lobbied for renewal of these tied facilities at Ferndale.
Thank you, CEO. Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Your declaration is noted. Question time for the public. Responses to previous questions taken on notice at item 4. Any responses to previous questions taken on notice will be noted in the ordinary council meeting agenda for next week. At item 4.2, questions from the public. The time set aside for public question time is 15 minutes, which may be extended if necessary. A question must relate to items listed on the agenda. I open question time now at 6:04 p.m. City has received a number of questions tonight from Mr. Sarkar. Mr. Sarkar, are you happy for me to read those to the meeting, or did you want to read them? You happy for me to read them? Thank you. Question 1 from Mr. Sarkar related to item CC 042 of 22. It seems like the procurement of Microsoft Enterprise software licensing will cost over $1 million. Has the City considered other alternatives to reduce costs, such as using open source software or other avenues? With that being said, I also want to thank the City's IT department for enabling live video streaming of council meetings from last month. Director Stephen Kane.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Through the Chair, the City has conducted an extensive review of its Microsoft products and is committed to ensuring that it only uses products that are necessary for the delivery of services. We do use some open source software, such as the use of open source GIS software. However, the City prefers to use Microsoft products for its main corporate workplace software to ensure compatibility with a number of line business applications, many of which are standard IT applications used by government and corporate enterprises. The City achieves administrative efficiencies with the use of these Microsoft products, both from an IT department administrative compatibility aspect as well as an understanding that our staff are more familiar with the products such as Windows and Office. And the staff are appreciative, Mr Sarker, of the comments with regard to the quality of the city's live streaming.
Thank you. Mr Sarker's second question is related to item EN 025 of 22. Does this include Agincourt Drive and other local streets around Willetton schools and shopping centre? Residents have been concerned about safety and on-street parking, particularly around school hours. Is there any form of monitoring the city can provide, for example, through rangers or parking inspectors? Director Warren Bowe.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Related to item EN 025-22, it does include, this report seeks to deal with the broader issue of road safety and does not delve deeply into specific locations. In regards to the elements of the school and shopping centres, these are covered within the Road Safety Management Plan, primarily within the following action item 4.2, being to promote and support road safety around schools. The area more broadly is also considered in item 1.2 and 1.12 of the plan pertaining to local area traffic management. The area surrounding Southlands Shopping Centre is considered and ranked in attachment 5 to the report. This places the area as the 4th highest ranked area for investigation for further treatments when considered against other neighbourhoods within Canning. The City will respond to specific concerns relating to parking and traffic within the areas as part of our customer service and requested system via either increased patrols or targeted amendments to the parking controls in the area.
Thank you. Question 3 is related to item EN 023 of 22. The question is, does this mean residents who register and take care of verges will receive a financial rebate and all other verges will be maintained by the city? The report mentions for the city to maintain verges, residents need to meet special criteria. What are they? Can the city provide some examples of council land management, as there is a lack of clarity in the community about verge maintenance? Director Warren Bowe.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. EN 023-22 does include a recommendation to establish a pilot program, but the specifics regarding the financial incentive and benefits are not clear and will be presented to elected members as part of a SIB if the recommendation is endorsed by council. The other element of Mr Sarker's question relates to policy ET 524, which is actually not on the agenda for discussion. So I'll take that question on notice and engage with Mr Sarker directly, Mr Mayor.
Terrific. Thank you. Thank you, Mr Sarker. There being no further questions from the public gallery, I'll declare public question time closed. It's now 6:08 p.m. Thank you. Deputations this evening at item 4.3, there are none. Items brought forward, there are none. Reports of committee meetings at item 6, there are none. First reports, item 7 from the CEO's office, there are none. Reports at 7.2, the responsible officer being Mr Stephen Kane, the Director of Canning Corporate and Commercial. The item is CC 040 of 22, the proposed lease for Restrada Junior Football Club, Prentwick Park in Willetton. The recommendation is on page 4 of tonight's agenda and is also on screen. Thank you, staff. Councillors, do you have any questions? Councillor Spencer-Teo.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Firstly, if I read the report correctly, why has the club not been charged any high fees for the facility in 30 years? Were they like Rossmoyne or Canning Vale clubs, where they fully funded the build of their club facilities, or did we build the club facilities and just haven't got around to putting a lease in place?
Director Kane.
Thank you. Through the chair, I can't say exactly what's happened over the last 30 years, and noting it is they have been in this facility for 30 years. It's clear that as we've gone through, there are a range of historical matters. They were referred to in the recent briefing for elected members of locations, historical societies and other groups, just haven't had a lease. So we've gone through now to tidy all of that up. This is one of those groups.
Councillor Spencer-Teo.
So considering they haven't paid for 30 years, does the club have the financial capacity to pay the said annual fee, waste fees, clean and maintain the premises, considering we've been doing all of that for them for the last 30 years?
Director.
Thank you, and through the chair, as part of the preparation of the item, the club were consulted on the form of a lease or a licence, and we're quite comfortable with what's proposed, knowing too that the costs associated with this are a reasonable level of cost contribution that all other clubs pay to the city for the use of facilities. We had no objection from the club to what's proposed.
Councillor Spencer-Teo.
Thank you. Last year, I queried the use of Prenwick Park facilities with you, Director Kane, and I was told that the recommendation for this particular club was going to be a seasonal licence. What's changed in the last 18 months for this recommendation to now be a lease, not a licence?
Director.
Thank you, and I can't recall the specifics of the conversation, but I bow to your superior memory, Councillor Spencer-Teo, of that. If you look at this item, you will note the club has been in there for 30 years. When we have looked at what the club own and their fixtures and fittings around the wall, unlike a seasonal licence which might require them to move some of those materials, look, as recently with one of the football clubs, there's no capacity for this group to do so. We considered the lease was the most sensible way to progress for them. It does, as the CO's required, have a step-in clause that we can presume to recover the space after 12 months by giving adequate notice for any particular reason, so therefore giving us the opportunity to step back in if we have to. But we did, as you'd note in paragraph 7 of the report, do extensive consultation with all the other users, noting we have, again, the Rostrata Family Centre next door, but we believe that the lease was the most equitable way to go.
Thank you. And just finally, given that there's been no informal lease for 30 years over this facility and BR01 is under review, why has this been brought to council now? I'm curious as to know why we didn't wait until BR01 had gone through the review process.
Director Kane.
Thank you, and through the chair, there are modifications that I understand proposed to the building. We are looking to spend a considerable amount of money on it, so we'll be doing so having a tenant in there that does have no tenure. BR01 is under review. The specific timeframe for that is not entirely clear. It might be another couple of months before it finally comes back. I spoke to the officer on the other day. So to provide the club with surety, to ensure that the city can progress its other works without having regard to what the club's future is going to be, we propose this item at this point in time.
Thank you.
So, sorry, are you saying that, does this have any impact on the CRFF funding that we've applied for? Like, must there be a tenant in there in order to qualify for that funding? Is that what you're kind of saying?
Director Kane.
No, I'm not saying that, but I'm saying we are putting a significant amount of money in there, and we have a tenant in there who has not paid us anything for a long period, well, since they've been in there, and in order to provide the city with some more understanding of its asset use, we are recommending at this stage that we enter a lease with them, secure their rights and our rights, and that way when we're all investing money in the facility, all parties are protected.
Thank you. Any other questions, councillors? Deputy Mayor Ben Kunza.
Through to Director Kane, I recognise you weren't here at the time, but when the council had to make a decision with respect to the Cannington Bowling Club due to the many gaps with that facility in terms of who was responsible for what, the city created BR01 and tried to standardise everything. Why is it we still in a position where certain clubs, we've got no real tenure of a club room? Surely there's responsibility gaps with who's responsible for what. How is that still a situation many years after we knocked down the Cannington Bowling Club?
Director Kane.
Thank you, and through the chair, again, I refer to the presentation we gave you recently on leases and licences, which outlined the large number of the large backlog we've been progressively working through. The fact that we still have historical issues today where we don't have a lease or a licence for parties using the city space. We are near the end, Deputy Mayor, of the conclusion of all of that. This is just one of those matters as we near the end. I can't tell you why it hasn't been dealt with in the past. I can say that since the city resourced this, again as presented during the presentation by Ms Crook, since the city has resourced this area, it has made significant inroads to dealing with these legacy issues.
Any other questions, councillors? I just had a question myself just in relation to the recommendation, and I wondered whether it needed some more, a little bit more detail about the exact portion of the pavilion that's proposed and where that detail might be found. I know that the lease, the conditions are actually contained in here on page, let me see. on page 5 of the report, there is a detailed drawing of the club rooms, and the club rooms are called the club rooms. There's also a storeroom there, and that's the green area, which is signified as the lease area. But then further into the report, where it comes to proposed lease terms, in the lease area, it talks about the committee room within the Prendwick Pavilion rather than the club rooms, and I wonder whether that maybe needs to be, that detail needs to be cleaned up, or am I wrong there? And also just to indicate that storeroom also, or refer it to the detailed drawing on page 4. Director.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Through the Chair, we're quite happy to refer to the detailed drawing on page 4. The lease area refers to the total lease space, 71.5 square metres, which if you see back to the drawing on page 5 of the agenda, is clearly marked down the bottom as 71.5 square metres.
Yeah,
I'd be happy to, if you wish to have the, to make note that the CEO have changed the, of that, but that is the area. It is known both as the club rooms and / the committee room.
Okay, I'll leave it at that. Any other questions, councillors, before we close off on that one? Thank you. Then we'll move on to the next item, which is CC 041 of 22. The title of that report being Proposed Road Closure, portion of Hamilton Street Road Reserve and portion of Petrol Close Road Reserve. And the suburb for that would be, just ask again that just for these reports, we probably need to have the suburb. I know it's contained later in the report. Oh, Cannington, it says in the officer's recommendation. Councillors, any questions in relation to that item? No questions at all. We shall then move on. Director, could I perhaps just suggest that we just include the suburb in the title of the officer's report, if that's possible. CC 042 of 22, procurement of Microsoft Enterprise Software Licensing 3-year agreement. The officer's recommendation is on page 18 of tonight's agenda and is on screen. Councillors, any questions in relation to that item? Yes, Councillor Jesse Jacobs.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. So it seems to be pretty expensive software. My understanding is we're just getting a license. We're not actually buying the software. If we were to buy the software, would it be cheaper?
No, it services a SaaS, isn't it? Director Kane, and it's an enterprise agreement across the whole organisation, I believe, but Director Kane.
So thank you, through the Chair. The Microsoft 365 product, which you buy a license to use. No, we don't have software installed often on devices these days. It allows people to use it freely across the full suite of our product, but we can't own it. It's obviously in this particular case, as they continue to upgrade it during the term of the lease, we'll have access to any upgrades they make.
Thank you. Yes, of course, Councillor Jacobs.
Thanks. Yes, Mr Mayor. 3 years. If we were to say we wanted to do it for longer, could we get a better deal? Because I don't see us moving past this for a while. So if we said 5 years, could we get a per year cost that's cheaper than 3 years divided, 1 million divided by 3 is $333,000 a year?
Director Kane.
Thank you, through the Chair. Unfortunately, we are a price taker in this market from the product, and just to give you an example, the software cost is now some 12% higher than it used to be. Taking a longer term lease is not going to change that. Having gone out for a procurement via way of tender, we also are obliged to stick to the tender term. What we have built into the tender is an estimate of the number of users. If, for instance, the city were to reduce the number of users during this the next 3-year period, it would have the opportunity of reducing its costs. Locking ourselves into anything longer, therefore, doesn't necessarily give us a better advantage.
Thank you, Director. Deputy Mayor.
3 to Director Kane, Mr Mayor. Just with regard to the WALGA panel members, what's the process that those 3 panel members get onto? I was just wondering in terms of the qualitative assessment, obviously 80% is the price, and then there's the skills, experience, account management and demonstrated experience. Do they not go through that sort of analysis to become a panel member?
Director Kane.
You talk about pre-qualification now for the timbers or somebody else who's from Walga. So I think you're referring to the Walga products we get onto the Walga panel. Yes, so they do go through a pre-qualification, but this is the same for the CUA for the state. So we could have procured this through a common user agreement from the state or from Walga directly. They go for a pre-accreditation, but you're talking about a software product that is worldwide used by virtually everybody in terms of Microsoft Suite.
Thank you. Any other questions, councillors? Councillor Parkinson, thank you.
Just a question for Mr. Kane. Could we have just purchased straight off the CUA? Was there any financial benefit obtained by going to tender? Could we not have just done it straight off the CUA?
Director Kane.
Again, the matter is before you tonight because it exceeds our threshold, the CO's threshold to procure. So whether you procure this through CUA or Walga, the price would have been the same. We are presenting it because the aggregate value of this as a licence over 3 years exceeds $1 million, which is the threshold at which the matters have to come back before council. So we can't get a better deal on this than what we've already got.
Thank you, councillors. We'll move on to the next item then, which is CC 043 of 22. That is the late item, monthly financial report of September 2022. The recommendation is on page 2 of the late items agenda and is on screen. Any questions in relation to the late item? Thank you. We shall then move on to CC 044 of 22. That's another late item, the budget review as at 31st of October 2022. The officer's recommendation is on page 40 of the late item agenda and is on screen. Any questions in relation to the budget review? Councillor Mark Bain.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm happy to take the responses and receive them via the OCN papers in the comment section. Paragraph 15, capital expenditure, Ferndale Crescent, Bassaria Crescent, 451,362. What is this project? And is that project separate to the CapEx project that we have for road rehabilitation in the same area? And D, road safety improvements within the Charles Treasure Park neighbourhood. What and where are those improvements taking place? Thank you.
Director, are you able to answer those questions or are you going to take those on notice?
I'm happy to take those on notice, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
We'll take those on notice, Councillor Bain, if you're fine with that. Thank you very much. Any further questions before we move on? Thank you, councillors. We shall then move on to item 7.3 on tonight's agenda, which is CD 018 of 22. The title of the report being Appointment of City of Canning Design Review Panel Chair, Deputy Chair and Members. The responsible officer this evening is Mr. Sergio Famiano, the Acting Director of Canning Development. The recommendation appears on page 29 of tonight's agenda and is on screen. Councillors, any questions in relation to those proposed candidates? Councillor Mark Bain.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. If I remember correctly from the last time we appointed members to the review panel, that was in 2020. An issue was raised, concerns particularly reducing the cost of the meetings by increasing the fees paid by the applicant. Has the cost for ratepayers for these meetings been reduced since the last appointment?
Mr. Famiano, are you able to answer that tonight?
I can answer that. The rates haven't changed, so the costs haven't been reduced. However, the fees that apply to applicants who are proposing to go to a design review panel have actually increased, and we're actually on a pathway of full cost recovery within 5 years. And I think this point was raised when the policy was reviewed last year, and we're on that pathway, that 5-year pathway.
Thank you, Councillor Bain.
Thank you for that, Mr. Mayor. Pleased to hear that. Have we added an extra member to the panel?
It's a pool of members, I think, is it, Mr. Famiano?
It is, yeah. There's
We've got an extra
eight in total.
Was it not 7 previously?
Yeah, and that's correct. And when we reviewed the policy last year, we decided that we needed a bit more depth to the panel, so we added an additional panel position.
Councillor Bain.
So there's no concern with adding the extra panel member that there'll be an increased cost? We can still achieve cost parity within 5?
The additional panel member is not per meeting. We don't have an additional panel member per meeting. It's just an additional option. So now we have a pool of 8 experts to draw upon, but the number of experts that attend a meeting hasn't changed. That's typically 3 members.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Jacobs.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I'm looking at page 35, and I'm looking at they get paid $2.50 per hour plus GST. The members will be paid an additional, paid a sitting fee for attendance, 3 to 3 hours, plus up to 1.5 hours for meeting costs, preparation, work and travel. The chair will be paid an additional hour to accommodate their additional responsibilities. So I was thinking, like, everybody's doing Zoom now, or what's the other called? What's the other one? Microsoft, what's that one called? Microsoft Teams, or whatever you call it, or Sirix, or something like that. My question is, if we were to say, if they were to meet online, could we perhaps cut, because if they're going to charge us for road time, that's pretty expensive road time, like $250. I'd probably like to stay on the road for 10 hours with that. But yeah, so I was just thinking, the question is there, can we use technology to control those sort of costs?
What's the normal procedure for the meetings, Mr. Famiano? Is there?
Yeah, typically the meetings are held in person, and the reason for that is that there's a lot of contextual benefit in having that face-to-face. You are right, though, in the sense that if you were to have online meetings, and we have had some during the COVID period, you possibly do save time in travel. So it's something we can look at, but there is that benefit of having the one-on-one, face-to-face contextual context around the application. That's why we generally do it that way.
Thank you. Councillor Jacobs.
Yeah, one more. So you've said that within 5 years we're going to be cost neutral. How much is it going to cost us between now and then to get cost neutral?
Mr. Famiano.
Yeah, so look, typically we have a budget of around $45,000, which we put towards design review panels that pays the fees for the candidates. We currently, on average, we recoup around $20,000. And you may recall some of you may recall from the last year's presentation of the design review panel policy, we actually have started to increase it quite significantly, and the plan was over 5 years to get that cost neutrality. So we're looking at potentially, on a typical year, an extra $20,000 is what we're aiming to achieve, and we're taking that incremental step because of the voluntary nature of design review panels, and also not to shock the industry, so to speak, by increasing it rapidly over a short period of time.
Thank you. Councillor Jacobs.
Thanks. And then my final question is there any risk of superseding, or is there any possibility to hook up with a few other councils and share the cost? I think from memory last year I asked a similar question. But yeah, the first question was 2 questions. First question is risk of superseding. Is there? Obviously it's hard to say. It's the state government, next year someone has a great idea, let's pass it, let's take that off council. It's quite popular to take everything off council anyway. So one is that risk. And 2, is there a benefit to saying, Gosnells, Belmont, hey, we're awesome, come with us, and you guys can share some
I
of the costs?
understand the reason for the question, but you might be better to take these offline, Councillor. Tonight we're only dealing with candidates for the panel. That's all we're dealing with, not reviewing the policy.
I don't think I'd take much time. I mean, it's questions. I can't ask questions next week.
Mr. Famiano, can we take that on notice and perhaps provide an answer to Councillor Jacobs on that? Yep.
I'm happy to do that, no problems.
Thank you. Any other questions in relation to this item, the nomination of applicants? Thank you, councillors. We'll move on to item 7.4. Director Warren Bowe is a responsible officer for this report and the following reports. The first of which is EN 023 of 22, review of verge treatments and verge registration policies. The recommendation is on page 36 of the agenda and is on screen. Councillors, do you have any questions, please? Councillor Hardeep Singh.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Question for Director Bowe. Who is currently legally responsible for maintaining city verges?
Director Bowe.
That's an interesting question. Thank you, Councillor Singh. The city has the management order of the carriageway under the Local Government Act. However, the local laws require a landowner who installs a verge treatment to be responsible for the verge outside their residential property under the current local law.
Thank you. Councillor Singh.
So just to rephrase, Director Bowe, as per state orders, we are supposed to maintain verges. However, as per local law, which this council sets, if a resident sets up a verge, they are required to maintain that verge. Is that the correct interpretation of your answer?
Director, maybe just explain the management order that we have and how that applies.
Yeah, obviously the city is responsible for the care and control of the large number of roads within the road network. Main Roads WA retain responsibility for some of the more significant roads and distributor roads. And whilst the land is technically under the care and control, the verge land is under the care and control of the local government, the local law does convey responsibility to the property owner adjacent to that verge once they install verge treatments.
Councillor Singh.
Follow-up questions, Mr. Mayor. Revised policy, point number 4, says property owners, occupiers and residents are encouraged to landscape and maintain the verges adjoining their properties to improve the environmental value and the appearance of the streetscape. Question is, what if they don't? What happens to those verges? Do they remain unkempt?
Director Bowe.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. No, they don't remain unkempt. The city currently delivers a service to maintain the verges. The purpose of the local law and the policy is to give guidance to the landowner if they wish to undertake treatment of the verge, what they can and can't do in that space.
Councillor Singh.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just to clarify, if this council adopts the revised policy next week, all those verges which are not maintained by residents will still be maintained by city. Is that correct?
Director Bowe.
No, that's not correct.
So my question is, what will happen to those verges, assuming this revised policy gets adopted? Let's say out of 10 residents, 4 are maintaining or 6 are maintaining, 4 doesn't. Those verges which are not maintained, what will happen to those verges? What will city do about that?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The city would take a risk-based approach to dealing with the quality, the treatment, and generally what happens in that space to protect the public. If it doesn't become an issue in relation to trafficability or pose a risk to people, pedestrians and users of the thoroughfare, then the city would not take any action in relation to that. However, if someone chooses to install treatment, for example, installing limestone blocks or other star pickets or other tripping hazards that pose a risk, then the city does have the ability through the application of the policy and the local law to take action then. And that is the purpose of the policy, to give us guidance under the auspices of the local law to ensure that we try and protect the safety and the presentation of the residential verges.
Thank you. Councillor Singh.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In the revised policy, point number 10, it says non-conforming verge treatments. There are quite a few. Once this policy becomes active, there will be maybe hundreds of verges which are, as per this policy, are non-conforming. What is city's position? The policy says city may take action. Out of those 100 verges, city may take action on 1 or 2. How city is going to decide which verge they're going to chase up, which verge they're going to leave?
Director Bowe.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Again, the city would take a risk-based approach. But what is important is that the regulatory framework is in place under the local law, which is also supported by the more prescriptive permissible verge treatments in the policy to give us guidance of what we would and wouldn't do in relation to trying to address issues on the verge. We don't take a militant approach. We don't have the resources to be out there identifying non-compliant verge treatments. We rely on people reporting non-compliant verge treatments, and we do have then the legal ability to take action. But we're not out there seeking out to pick a fight with residents about the verge and what they choose to do with the verge outside their property. Our staff in the Parks and City Greening team expend an inordinate amount of time trying to resolve issues regarding what people do and enable their verges to become in the public realm. We also have a compliance team who have the legal ability to take action to address issues, but we're not out there trying to do that. We work with the residents. We will develop a process, and when we refer the Waterwise pilot, we will step out with the elected members the approach that we take, which isn't to immediately bring out the rule book through our compliance team and make people do certain things. We want to try and work with them to draw their attention to the risks that non-compliant verge treatments pose to the general public and negotiate an outcome that's acceptable for both parties.
Councillor Singh.
Follow-up question, Mr. Mayor. So thank you for the answer, Director Bo. I completely understand City's position and how much resources we have to go and chase all the non-conforming verges. What I'm trying to get into, this revised policy basically says 3 points only, which says City can take action in situation 1, 2, 3. So I'll use an example, which is a currently ongoing case. One of the residents reported to me. If a resident had an artificial turf installed on their verge from last 10 years, let's say, and a neighbor complains saying this is a non-conforming verge, City is obliged to take action because there is a complaint, while there are 50 more artificial turfs. Now the property owner may say, why are you removing my turf while there are 49 others? City doesn't have resources to chase those 49 other artificial turfs. This revised policy doesn't say that City cannot forcibly remove that artificial turf without the consent of a property owner. So I'm looking for some information here. This policy gives City right to do what they seem right without getting the consent from the property owner. So would like to hear more. Will City do it, or will City seek property owners' consent before changing the non-conforming verge?
We would always work with owners, wouldn't we, residents, and we would be working with them on a case-by-case basis, but I'll allow you to answer the question.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, but you're correct. The opportunity to apply the local law and to take action for the non-compliance has existed. It existed when the old local laws were in place and remains current now. My staff may be able to help me, but I'm not sure when the last time we enforced the local law without the consent of or against the wishes of the resident. In a couple of examples that you and I have spoken about, we endeavour to work with the resident, including an offer to share costs to ensure that the non-compliant treatment is removed. Notwithstanding that is a cost, it's actually a cheaper option than trying to pursue a resident and pick a fight with the resident through the courts based on the local law and our ability to apply the local law. So that has been our approach. The statistics indicate that since January 2021, we've had 44 complaints about non-compliant verges. Again, my staff will probably correct me on this, but as far as taking action against the wishes of the resident, I don't believe we've had any. We have implemented a process, including with the assistance of the compliance team, to try and negotiate an outcome with the residents.
Very good to hear that, Director Bo. My last question, how many verges does City maintain right now in the city, and how many are we expecting to maintain once this new revised policy is adopted? Are we going down or are we going up?
Director Bo.
I think I'll have to take that one on notice, Mr. Mayor. I don't have those stats, and I'm not going to ask the staff to try and respond with the statistics, but we'll provide as close an estimate as we can to the council prior to next week.
Get back to you on that, Councillor. Thank you. Councillor Jacobs.
Mr. Mayor. 8C, removal of artificial grass. would it be possible to change and make artificial turf an approved treatment for the verges?
Director Bowe, would that be a good idea?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I think I'll answer Councillor Jacobs' question and say that the policy is the policy of the council. It is drafted by the administration, and the administration believe, for various reasons, that artificial turf should not be a permissible treatment. Artificial turf was also not a permissible treatment under the previous policy. There's a misconception that because you don't have to water artificial turf that it's more sustainable. Certainly its life cycle costs are not sustainable. It does require maintenance. It is subject to the impacts of service and utility providers who under the various acts that they operate on are under no obligation to reinstate artificial turf if they tear it up through the course of their activities. I think artificial turf releases microplastics into the environment, and from an environmental perspective is not recommended to become a permissible verge treatment. But again, it's the council's policy.
Thank you. Councillor
Mr.
Jacobs.
Mayor, I've got two more questions. So first one, second one. The second question is, if it was the will of council, so a particular councillor obviously could put up a nom saying we change artificial turf as a recognised treatment. That if that was a motion, obviously, then the administration would be obligated to implement it. Would that be my understanding? Be correct, Director?
Yeah, it'd be not a nom, it'd be an amendment on the night. Any councillor can pass an amendment to a matter, but then it would need to be seconded, and it would only be implemented if it's supported unanimously by the council. Yep, your last.
The last one. And if I say that during this policy, like where I live, first there was about a quarter of the houses with astroturf. Now it's probably about half. So I know it's all good and well hear this rhetoric about plastics are bad, but this is the artificial turf now, at least in my ward, is probably the go-to verge treatment for residents. I mean, if it's not enforceable, why are we letting contractors come in and just? I mean, you could use satellite and you could pick it all up. So it just seems I'm a bit conflicted. We're sort of saying
just your question.
We don't. My question is, why have a policy and not enforce it?
Director Bowe.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Well, I believe with that we do enforce it within the resources that we have at our disposal, but we also apply a risk-based approach. Now, does a well-installed, well-maintained artificial turf on the verge pose a risk to the public insofar as tripping or other activities? It probably doesn't, and therefore our energies or our compliance activities would be more directed to those verge treatments which do pose a risk, such as limestone blocks and star pickets and the like. It's a question that we've grappled with on a regular basis. I'm sure we have far better things to do as the local government that provide a better level of service to our community than going along and ripping up people's artificial turf. And my staff will attest that those discussions with those residents who've paid not an insignificant amount of money to have that done, and they think it looks nice, that's a challenge that we have. But artificial turf has been an unapproved treatment for some time. We've worked over many years to try and reach outcomes with the residents. We don't always achieve a satisfactory outcome.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor.
Just on that subject, but the city does a lot more to educate people now, doesn't it? In terms of alerting people when they submit a development application that permissible verge treatments to try to mitigate the risk of them doing it on their own.
Is that true? Director Bowe?
Absolutely, Mr Mayor, and we encourage people, and the large majority of people out there, of the 90-odd thousand residents, do the right thing. There are still some who inadvertently or otherwise install verge treatments that don't comply, and we'll try and negotiate with them to achieve the outcome. Certainly the Waterwise pilot program is something that we're really keen to establish, to provide a financial rebate to residents who install more sustainable verge treatments. We'll be designing some guidelines, some example gardens. We'll be doing some demonstration Waterwise gardens across the city as part of the pilot program moving forward.
Thank you. Deputy
And
Mayor.
just following on from Councillor Singh's questions, I don't know if I missed it, but can you confirm that the artificial turf not being a prescribed treatment is not retrospective of 2016? So just having actual artificial turf on your verge doesn't mean that it's not a permissible treatment. It may be, I think an example was 10 years ago. Well, that was a permissible treatment at the time, so it's not actually an affront.
Director Bowe.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. To the best of our knowledge, using aerial photography, we were able to get a fair indication as to when that artificial turf may have been installed, and we haven't applied retrospectivity, no.
Just a couple of questions, Mr Mayor, of my own. Just with respect to the pilot program, obviously we had a pilot program with CCTV and it got very popular and then it grew up, it exploded in terms of what people wanted us to spend on it. With respect to this pilot program, my previous understanding was we were wanting to identify savings to invest in it. That doesn't seem to be the case now. What happens if going forward we have this taken up quite a lot? How do we plan to fund it, given that we're currently in an atmosphere where we're trying not to invest in new things?
Director Bowe.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. We'd originally proposed a figure a little bit in excess of the 10,000 that we are now. We can accommodate that 10,000 and leverage our Waterwise council status with Watercorp to attract a 20,000 pool of funding for the rebates. And I think, pending its success, we will need to find further funds in further budgeting cycles to enable us to accommodate it. Certainly the smallish rebate that we're looking at providing for Waterwise Gardens is dwarfed by the time that it's consumed in trying, of staff time consumed in trying to address these non-approved verge treatments. So we think that there's benefit in doing it and cost benefits in doing it that way.
Deputy Mayor.
And just lastly, I know a number of local governments do this, but given that one of the philosophical points of view is to increase local biodiversity and support local fauna, and then the plants are supposed to be under 700 millimetres, is there not, in terms of having a broad policy that's the whole city of Canning and not actually looking at any risks, doing that on an arterial road, attracting fauna to an area where they might get hit by cars? How do we alleviate those risks in terms of wanting to have a Waterwise garden, but then creating other issues? Again, I recognise other local governments do it, but are you going to do it down high road and roads that have a large number of vehicles? How do we manage that?
Director Bowe.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Look, I don't have the answer, Deputy Mayor Kunze, but certainly when we prepare the briefing for elected members in relation to the pilot, I think that will be a strong consideration of how we sort of manage that risk of, as you mentioned, to the higher volume arterial roads, and maybe we can address that in some of the pilot issues.
Thank you. Councillor Spencer-Teo.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just on this pilot program, when you talk about the SIB that's going to come, is that going to come before the pilot program parameters are set? So are we going to have some, excuse me, we're going to have some say and some influence over that pilot program?
Director Bowe.
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. That's the plan.
Okay.
We would like to get your feedback, similar to that raised by the Deputy Mayor, but we have some ideas about how the pilot might work, but it's going to be a briefing that we'd like your feedback on.
Thank you. So I'll save most of my questions for that, but there's just a couple more. Also, please correct me if I'm wrong. Oh, there we go. Is that you? Who did that?
Look at me. Didn't do anything. Just sitting up here minding
Stacey
my own
looks guilty.
business.
we also have made it for a long period of time, as long as I can remember, a condition of a building permit that certain verge treatments are also used as well. And obviously that completely excludes artificial turf. Correct me if I'm wrong, is that true?
Director Bowe?
I may defer to Acting Director Famiano. I'm not sure how we could apply a condition on a building permit that relates to a verge, but I'll hand over to
Acting Director?
Yeah, I don't think that's correct. I know that we do have a local planning policy that does refer to sustainability incentives, and basically the policy, it's number 10, was put together in order to allow variations to development in exchange for sustainability initiatives on their property. And one of the opportunities that are offered to the applicant to consider, and it's administered through planning approvals, not the building permits, is a rain garden in the verge area. And there are conditions around that. Needs to be maintained by the landowner that puts it in.
Could I just get you to double check that? Because I've got information from Graham Bride over a similar case where it is actually a condition. Well, it's not a condition as such, but it does say that as part of this permit, the verge treatment must be of one of these things, and these things are specifically excluded, which includes pea gravel and artificial turf.
I'll double check for you, Councillor. There could be a note. I doubt it's a condition, but I'll check for you.
All right, that'd be great. And also with the item 10C, obviously talking about the pilot program, so I know it's not set in stone, but I just want to understand the rationale behind giving a rebate for somebody who's in breach of policy. I would have maybe thought that, like our concierge pickup service for, turf would have been a better thing than a financial incentive. And then why have we only thought about artificial turf? Why aren't we also including pea gravel and the other things that are not permissible?
Director Bowe?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm certainly happy to take that feedback. I guess in discussing this with staff, providing a financial incentive to have those removed is a lot cheaper than making them remove them through taking action under the local law. So that was the main driver for that, but happy to take your feedback.
Thank you. Yeah, because the other concern would also be is what happens to the artificial turf once it's ripped up? Do they just chuck it in their normal bin? At least if we can manage the disposal of it, makes it a little bit easier.
Thank you. Councillor Hardeep Singh.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Director Bowe has partially answered this question, but I need to rephrase my question for a clear answer, so please, if I may. Question is, on a street, if a particular verge is unmaintained because the occupiers or the owners doesn't care about the verge, but the neighbors complain and it doesn't pose any health risk to the community, for example, just weeds and stuff like that, it just looks bad. What is city's position if neighbors or let's say the other residents of that street complains to the city that that verge is always unmaintained? Will the city maintain that verge? Will the city mow it, or will it be just left as it is?
Have you got an unkempt verge? I think I need to drive.
No, but the reason I'm asking these questions, I get a lot of complaints from our residents who are all the time complaining about unkempt verges. Most of those residents, they maintain their own verges, and they are not happy that their neighbors are not maintaining because they are doing it for the sake of making their street look nice. But then there are many residents, let's say some rental properties who occupiers are very busy and they don't care about the verges because they're going to move in 6 months' time to somewhere else. So what does city do in those situations? I mean, Bentley is full of these examples.
Yeah, I know.
So please help me understand what is
situation.
city's position.
Director Bowe.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'll try and be clearer. The aesthetic of the verge is not the driver for the local law requirements for it to be treated in a certain way. However, we understand that some neighbours, like the experience that you have had, Councillor Singh, don't appreciate the fact that they spend a lot of time and effort in maintaining their verge, yet their neighbour doesn't. If the neighbour's verge poses no risk or contravenes no policy or no local law, then it's not necessarily the domain of the local government to get involved in those issues.
That's just the fact of it. Thank you very much, councillors. Councillor Bain.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. How many registered verge lawns do we have in Canning?
Director Bowe, are you able to answer that, or would you like to take that on notice? So you're looking for,
I'll take it. I'll take it on notice.
take
Thanks,
that on
Mr. Mayor.
notice? We'll get back to you on that, councillor Bain.
No problem. So with the rescinding of policy ET 523, should that be accepted by council at the OCM, there'll be no longer registered verges in Canning. Is that correct?
Director Bowe.
That's correct, Mr. Mayor.
Have the landowners of those registered verge lawns been contacted for comment?
Director Bowe.
I'm not sure whether they've been contacted directly, Mr. Mayor, but certainly the consultation process that we undertook in relation to the 3 policy reviews may have engaged with them, but I can get some information from the staff on that and provide back to Councillor Bain and the council.
Thank you. Councillor Bain.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just to confirm that planter beds / vegetable gardens are approved verge treatments under the revised policy, is that correct?
Director Bowe.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you.
So then that follows on, I guess, dovetails into the next question. So wood and steel not mentioned as acceptable materials. Should that be changed?
Director Bowe.
I think the interpretation would be, Mr. Mayor, that as long as they comprise a reasonable description of a raised planter bed, that there would be no need to specify.
And finally, Mr Mayor, so the City of Vincent, in their policy, they specifically have a section that refers to vegetable gardens, planter beds. How come we didn't follow in their footsteps with this policy?
Director Bowe. Do we use that as a reference point, the Vincent policy? I know it was referenced in the report.
Yeah, we did, Mr. Mayor, but I'll consult with the staff, and we do use the term raised planter beds. Whether or not we need to be more specific
More
or not,
descriptive.
we can take that on notice.
Thank you. Councillor Jacobs.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Just wanted to know about registered lawns. It sparked my interest, curiosity. What sort of protections did we have if you were a resident and you said, "Hey, my lawn's registered"? I just honestly don't know what.
You want to know
what
what are the privileges?
was it?
What does it mean?
Yeah, I've seen the signs and I just don't know what happens.
Just briefly, Director, are you able
If
to
I
just
could.
spell out what the privileges are for a registered verge?
I can, Mr. Mayor. There aren't many because the protection is actually afforded under the local law, regardless of whether the registration of the verge occurs through the policy.
There's nothing, is there?
That's right. The local law actually is the instrument by which our enforcement people and our rangers can ask people and fine people if it evolved to that for parking on a verge for which they don't have permission.
Oh, okay. So it's about parking. Stop people parking on your verge. That's it. Councillor Bain, that's piqued your interest as well?
Yes, it has, Mr Mayor. So there's nothing that an adjacent landowner to the verge, generally they're kept to, from my observation, to a high standard. So there's nothing, they're not obliged to mow it themselves, water it, keep it to a high standard. Is that correct?
Are there conditions attached to registering a verge?
I don't believe so, Mr. Mayor. But
Maybe we'll just send some information out to councillors in relation to what exactly a registered verge is and what are the conditions around that, and any privileges. Should be pretty simple, just pluck it out of the local law. It's in the policy attachment 3, apparently. Is that the current one?
Well, that's the one that's being rescinded.
Oh, it's in the rescinded one. Yes, Councillor Bain.
Yes, Mr Mayor. Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, I've read through it, but it doesn't say anything about parking on there or special privileges or anything that a registered verge owner might have.
All right, well, we'll deal with that. We'll get Director Bowe, if you'd be so kind, Director Bowe, just to provide just a little bit of information. It's obviously an interesting topic for everybody. Thank you very much. Any other questions before we move on? Thank you. We shall move on. Thank you, councillors. Thank you, Director Bowe. To EN 025 of 22, speed zones on local streets within the City of Canning. The officer's recommendation is that council endorses the City of Canning Road Safety Management Plan, which is attached attachment number 3, and the recommendation is on page 52 of tonight's agenda and is on screen. Any questions about that item? Councillor Amanda Spencer-Teo.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Page 180 of the large reports, where it lists the locations of the trailer locations, will these be deployed by rank, or will they just go out alphabetically or randomly?
Is there an order to the list, Director?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. If I could just call up our Manager of Transport Engineering, Ben Moore, if he can answer that question for us.
Mr Moore, welcome. If I could get you to step up to the podium. Did you hear the question? I'll just get Ms Cornish to put the mic on. It's not on at the moment. I think we might be having a mic problem. We'll just hold on just for a moment, Mr Moore, until we resolve that. We have Ms Cornish walking over now. She's reached the podium. Can maybe if you come over to, can you come over to one of the spare mics here? I'll invite you over into the chamber, Mr Moore, but not for very long. Just here, Mr Moore, make yourself comfortable. Again, you heard the question?
This is a very uncomfortable position for me to be in right
That's
now.
it. More
Thank you,
uncomfortable for
and
us.
Through you, Mr Mayor.
Go ahead, Mr Moore.
There is no specific order to that at the moment. It would probably be determined operationally based on other operations that are occurring with the teams that are setting those trailers out at the time, or other activities that are occurring within those areas.
I just might ask you just to stay there just for the moment, just in case there's another question. Councillor Spencer-Teo.
Get comfortable, Ben. How many trailers do we have, and are we going to need more to be able to facilitate this strategy?
Mr Moore.
Through you, Mr Mayor. At this point in time, we have 2 VMS boards within the city that have the technical capability to be deployed for this. More than likely, we will look to hire in trailers where they are needing to be supplementing to complete that portion of the program. And keeping in mind, this is a pilot version of this. So this is looking at what would need to be implemented in this year to respond to the issues that have been found through this consultation and other issues. Really what that looks like going forward, we will need to adjust at the end of the year to determine the appropriate level of service for that.
So that list, sorry, through you, Mr Mayor, that list of trailer locations, is that for a 12-month period, or is that over the 10 years of the
Mr Moore.
strategy?
Through you, Mr Mayor, that is what is intended within this 12 months as a direct response to the community consultation activities and activities that were, or issues that were found as a result of the consultation and data that we have captured.
Right, and you touched on it just before. These are variable message boards. They're not speed calculators like the smiley face to say that, yep, you're doing the speed limit. It's just basically slow down messaging. Is that correct?
Through you,
Mr. Moore.
The devices are actually often one and the same. There is a specialist piece of equipment that is fitted within the variable message signboards that is able to capture via radar the speed of vehicles approaching, so they can be configured in a number of different ways. The VMS simply refers to the fact that it's variable messages.
Yep.
So you can program it in any way. You would likely bring in one that is most appropriate for that type of message to be displayed. They're often a smaller device that's more appropriate for occupational health and safety issues to configure them on site and set them up. Other means such as the smiley face boards on the individual signs, if we had a fixed site, could also be considered in the future.
Okay. And considering we're going to be doing all of these in a 12-month period, how long is each VMS going to be deployed for in each location?
Mr Moore.
Mr Mayor, at this stage we anticipate a single day per site to deploy them to the site and remove them. For some of those sites which are more prominent, we may look to deploy over multiple days or work around the operational constraints that we have on the deployment activities as to when they can be put out on site and when they can be removed. Keeping in mind with some of these deployments also, in some of the areas, they may be more prone to vandalism of that equipment as well, so we would likely deploy and remove in the same day.
Councillor Spencer-Terry.
Now, okay, that's the variable message boards. Now onto the traffic surveys. This is a 10-year strategy, but there's 200 odd locations on that list. Are they going to be spread over the 10 years, or are we going to condense that into the 12 months as well?
Mr Moore.
Mr Mayor, that would be captured in the 12-month period as a direct response to those sites which are intended as monitoring sites, many of which we would likely already be going back to look through anyway as a result of earlier surveys that have indicated, or customer complaints that have indicated there are things that we should be looking at, also referenced as part of the warrant system for repeat, investigations where there is a heightened level of concern over particular sites that say we should monitor as opposed to intervening.
So does that mean if we'd already done a traffic survey, let's say within the last 12 months, and one of those locations is on that list, would we not do another one? We'd just use the data from the one that was captured recently? Is that what you're saying?
Through you, Mr Mayor. The warrants policy probably better articulates the long-term vision for that, which indicates the point in time at which we would simply monitor and the conditions around when we would monitor those sites. If they are within a fixed range of speed or volume, there are times that you would say, okay, perhaps this does present as a concern and we would like to have another look next year just to check that that concern is valid. There are other times where those speeds are substantially acceptable, a few kilometres an hour over the limit, very low volumes that you may look at it and go, actually, this is by and large acceptable, but we'll have a look again in 5 years' time as opposed to 1 year.
Okay.
So,
And we outsource the traffic counting hardware and reporting, don't we?
Mr Moore.
Mr Mayor, yes, we do.
Councillor Spencer-Terry.
So how many can be installed at once? Can we have like 20 across the city at any one given time?
Mr Moore.
Through you, Mr Mayor, yes, we can. There are a number of contractors in the market that we liaise with. The city does own a small stock of counters that we can supplement into that program. However, we have good contacts and typically try and establish them in blocks at any one time so that we get a representative view of any area at one time as opposed to sporadic placements across areas that perhaps don't give a full view of the entire area at one time. So we might be able to see 6 streets in Canning Vale, for example, or as opposed to putting one in Canning Vale and one in Shelley and one in Queen's Park, and then not really getting a good view of what's happening in the suburb.
Councillor Spencer-Terry.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Will the data collected be available for us to look at post-survey? Obviously, when there's been cases, we've got to go through stuff and it's got to be, oh yeah, hang on, we'll just get that information, put it all together. Will there be like something on the hub that we can go, oh look, residents complained about this street, let me just go have a look, and we can, obviously see for ourselves, well, we last did a traffic survey 3 months ago and the average speed was this, so therefore...
Mr Moore, will it be
really a concern.
distributed, or what's the intention for the data?
Through you, Mr Mayor, we have discussed this internally. There is some train of thought as to, and some local governments have elected to release that information within their Intramaps setup, the public version of that, to provide some level of data. I guess I'd be slightly cautious on releasing that as to everyone at any point in time without the benefit of the additional information that a traffic engineer can provide to explain what that data means. So you use the term average vehicle speed. We would typically use the term 85th percentile or operating speed. They're going to be 2 very different speeds. So I think at face value, my preference in the early period would be to use that via the customer service request system or direct correspondence and release of a consolidated report at the end of each year that indicates the surveys that have been undertaken and the results, or individual responses to cases that come up that we can then explain the data that comes out. We have also had some preliminary discussions with Main Roads WA about the potential of backboning off their own system that has better explanatory notes around how that traffic data works, which has some other synergies of allowing other local governments to use it as well. They're in very, very early stages of that conversation though.
Okay.
Councillor Spencer-Terry.
And just finally, reading through the strategy, obviously there's a lot of data, there's a lot of information in there, and there's, from what I can get, and please correct me if I'm wrong, I'm kind of seeing two aspects to this strategy. One being if there's crash data that supports road safety modifications or traffic calming devices, we'll look at getting funding and addressing those issues. But if there's, more or less near misses or just like, minor community issues, we're looking at more of an education program around those issues. Is that right? Is my interpretation correct of the strategy?
Mr Moore?
Through you, Mr Mayor. By and large, yes. What there is actually within the road safety management plan, though, is also a section there which allows officers to proactively address potential issues within the road network. You'll see that referenced in there under the terminology of road safety inspections and utilising those specific types of resources to go out and look through areas which we receive problematic or continuous concerns through from the community, where we believe actually there could be something here which is generating a lot of near misses, but not necessarily the accidents for it, that we should be proactively addressing as opposed to waiting for the crash data to support intervention on those sites. We can also use those road safety inspections as part of the program to submit black spot applications as well. So that is cross-referenced within there. You'll see three different streams: reactive, proactive, and educative.
Thank you, Mr Moore.
Sorry, just one
Oh,
more.
I thought I heard the word finally
It was,
there.
but then he opened it.
Yeah, Councillor Spencer.
How do we
we'll
capture
wind
the
it up.
data on near misses knowing that 9 out of 10 don't get reported?
Mr Moore?
Through you, Mr Mayor, the customer service request system is our best tool for capturing near misses on our network. More often than not, when a customer is out there in the road network and they experience a near miss, they will pick up the telephone to us and let us know that the road is the most unsafe road that they have ever trafficked in their life, and it will be recorded for us to then investigate. Not always the case, doesn't always warrant intervention. We also find that we have situations with some particularly bad drivers on the road, some just pure anomalies. We need to look at each of them at face value and say, well, actually, given the circumstances described, is there a potential that we should be investigating this further and committing the resources to proactive measures such as a road safety inspection? We also have trained road safety inspectors in-house also, so we should keep in mind that there's probably a difference between an independent external road safety audit and us using our own trained resources to go and undertake those types of reviews in-house.
Thank you. Councillor Jacobs?
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I'm just going to look at my phone because I've got the information. This is on topic. RSE Horizon magazine, latest edition, page 25, top 8th, riskiest intersection in Perth, Hossack Avenue and Willilly Drive, Parkwood. Is that something that's on our radar to fix? Through you, Mr Mayor?
I'll refer to Director Bowe. Is that Hossack and Williri? Just your microphones, I think, gents. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Our engineers have investigated these accidents and could not find any correlations between them to indicate a pattern or specific area of concern that we could address. We've already discussed and are moving forward and having a road safety inspection done on that particular intersection.
Thank you. Yes.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Thanks for that. Basically, I've been reading this point 15, hang on, page 55, just give us a second. The last sentence, enforcement of speed limit is the responsibility of WA. And then point 14, main roads Western Australia are the authority responsible for setting speeds. So are we going to get some money off them, or, because budgets are becoming more and more tighter, is Walpole going to get into the game of putting up a few things, saying, instead of just, setting up roadside cash registers, are they going to actually say, hang on, warning, are they looking at something like that too? Or is it just going to be, the ratepayers of our city have to pay for all this?
Director, are we looking at alternate funding streams? or is
Thank
it
you,
not-
Mr Mayor. We already obtain a significant amount of funding through Main Roads Regional Road Group for black spot intersections or sections of road that qualify for that funding due to recurrence of crashes. I will ask Manager Ben Moore to comment in relation to Waypole.
Mr Moore, just in regards to Waypole.
Through you, Mr Mayor. I think the question is actually in relation to the payment for the signage to go in to be reinforced. That there is probably an item that you refer to, the roadside cash registers. I presume you're talking about speed cameras. The collection of funds from traffic infringements goes back through the Road Trauma Trust account through and is redistributed to the funding system as a whole across the state. So Main Roads receives a significant portion of those funds, which complete a portion of their operations. So Main Roads are responsible for installing and maintaining those traffic signs across the network, as well as the line marking. If there was a speed zoning change to occur, Main Roads would cover the cost for that speed zoning to occur. If there was a more bespoke piece of infrastructure put in, there is a potential that the city may be asked to contribute to it. Those types of things would be things such as traffic lights with red light cameras and speed cameras on them. We could be asked to contribute towards one of those if we were directly requesting it and had one approved.
Thanks, Mr Moore. Councillor Jacobs.
So one more. So just to clarify, basically, Waypole gets money sent to Main Roads. We might get a bit from Main Roads, but we couldn't directly say to Walpole, hey guys, how about a bit of money? We're going to do some traffic calming and we're going to prevent people from speeding and it's going to save people's lives and you go and have to fine so many people. Would they be interested in something like that?
I think the short answer will be a no. Mr Moore.
Yes, through you, Mr Mayor. The mechanism for the delivery of funds for road transport projects is more conventionally through Main Roads WA and the Regional Road Group application. They act on behalf of the police. The city liaise with groups such as Waypole for items such as traffic warden sites, but not traditionally on road safety projects, with the exception of fatality reports that will often have a Waypole officer involved in them.
Thanks, councillors. Deputy Mayor.
Through you, Mayor Hall, to either Director Bowe or Mr Moore, just with respect to how will we balance, or how do we balance funding individual roads, intersections that are based on crash statistics or speeding versus the priority list for the local area traffic management neighbourhood rankings report? Because in splitting up the city into certain neighbourhoods, there might be high profile issues, but then that neighbourhood doesn't actually rate as highly. How do we balance funding for the individual roads or intersections versus investing into that?
Mr Moore, I'll get you to address that if you don't mind.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and through you. The intention of the neighbourhood rankings report, as well as other items that you raised, such as the Black Spot program and other local area traffic management interventions, the neighbourhood rankings report is directly related to a program that is being implemented by Main Roads WA called the Low Cost Urban Road Safety Program. That has a specific allocation of funds from the state and has got an approval for the next 8 years from memory towards giving out very large sums of money for implementation of lower cost measures appropriate for residential streets and lower order residential roads. What that doesn't cover though are the district distributor and arterial road networks that some of the more significant accidents are occurring on. Those roads are more often suited to actual application via the black spot programs. So we need to make a careful assessment of, I guess, balancing up one, asset preservation requirements and when we're going to be intervening in road networks anyway, with when it is just a local road issue that can be appropriately dealt with within the neighbourhood and the low cost urban road safety program, work with our project partners and sponsors like Main Roads in that, as well as when we more appropriately hold a project over to say, well, actually, we want to put a more significant treatment on this. It warrants it given the type and nature of accidents that are there, and applying for that one through the state or federal black spot program, or applying municipal funding to it.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor, do you have a follow-up?
Yeah, so just how, I don't know if this was, I didn't read it, but how the individual areas were identified with splitting Canning into sections. Was there any logic to it, or?
Mr Moore.
Thank you, through you, Mr Mayor. The way in which we've produced this report is in direct liaison with Main Roads WA. The program was theirs to control. What we sought to understand was actually how they had applied that set of principles across the city of Canning. So we've worked with the consultant who developed the report for Main Roads and the program for Main Roads and said, well, if we applied exactly the same criteria, where do we actually rank? Where do each of our suburbs, there is a big black box that sits in the Main Roads office that has all of their data. We thought, let's replicate it so we can get an accurate reflection for council as part of this notice of motion as to where the neighbourhood safety rankings would sit across Canning. So as far as how the boundaries were set, we've left that precisely to the setup that the Main Roads team have applied across all of metropolitan Perth. And then we wanted to reflect how the Canning neighbourhoods rank as a result of that to provide some data for council to consider.
Thanks, Mr Moore.
So no gerrymandering of the boundaries to get more funding? Yeah, so the thing that stood out to me was, apart from the top two, the rest of them are very similar scores and they cascade very similar down. There's obviously a lot of issues in the Carousel and Charles Treasure Park areas in terms of a more holistic analysis rather than just looking at individual issues, and that's the benefit that you'll get from looking at it from a neighbourhood ranking rather than looking at individual projects. Is that correct? Yeah.
Just quickly, Mr Moore. Yep.
Yeah, just so it's on the record, through you, Mr Mayor. Correct, yes.
Yeah, correct. Thank you. Councillor Singh.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, through you. Ben, question for you. 85th percentile speed, just to simplify, on a road which is 50 kilometers per hour, if 100 cars pass by, we are looking at that 85 of those cars on an average speed. If they went at 55 kilometers per hour, then we are looking at 85th percentile speed is 55. Is that correct, or am I not defining it correct? I'm asking this because my all follow-up questions will revolve around 85th percentile speed, and it's good to be clear what are we talking about.
Be careful, Mr Moore. This could be a trick question. Have you got an answer to that?
Through you, Mr Mayor, I'll actually ask a show of hands for who's a mathematician in the room for the correct definition, but correct, it's a speed at which 15% of those vehicles would not have exceeded. So with the example you provided, that is broadly correct. If 85 out of 100 vehicles were travelling at 55 kilometres an hour, you would see an 85th percentile. Or actually, would you, if you were going above that? No, I think yes, correct.
I'm just broadly, I'm not looking to be exact.
Yeah, we will typically refer to it as the operating speed of a road. It is the speed you will most often encounter on the road if you summarised all of those speeds.
Thank you. So my question is, city accepts that if the 85th percentile speed is within 10 kilometers above the posted limit, and city doesn't take any action. Is that right? Let's say in a 50 kilometer per hour zone, if most cars, let's say 85% cars are traveling at 60 kilometer per hour, we don't take any action. Is that correct?
We can't take action anyway. Only Western Australian Police can take action. Are you talking about
sorry,
infringements?
No, Mr. Mayor, what I meant by action is installing speed bumps or putting some traffic calming, some actions to basically calm that traffic.
Mitigating actions.
Mitigating actions, not issuing any traffic infringements, nothing
Mr.
like
Moore?
that.
Through you, Mr Mayor. Keeping in mind that speed is only one of the issues that we will look at when referred an item like that. If speed alone was the concern and we say experienced 7, 8, 9 kilometres an hour over the limit as the 85th percentile speed, it would likely go on a monitor list in the first instance. The second we hit the 10 kilometre an hour threshold, we have the ability to refer it to WA Police for targeted intervention from them. That said, we will also often look at other items within there. When we receive a customer service request, we will often hear items such as hooning referred to. So we'll do an investigation to interrogate whether we're seeing burnout marks on a road, or within that traffic data set we're seeing instances of significant spikes that have typical patterns that are applied. Every Friday night at midnight there's 55 cars that go through at 150 kilometres an hour. We'd certainly refer that on, even if the 85th percentile was beneath that 10k threshold, but we need to treat each and every case individually and look at a broader set than just the speed number.
Councillor Singh, did you have another question?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, through you. The question I'm struggling with, when most residents complain that most of the cars on their street are traveling actually way above the speed limit, what I'm trying to understand is at what point city intervenes and installs some traffic mitigation devices. What is our criteria? Do we look at 85th percentile speed 15 kilometers over the speed limit, 5, 10?
I think Mr. Moore was just saying, but it's not only about speed, it's about a whole range of matters other than speed. So speed's just one factor. Can I just ask you just to keep your response as short as you can, Mr. Moore? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I will. Probably to better answer that then, you're best pointed in the direction of the warrants policy, which exists as an attachment, and the warrants guidelines. That covers the multi-criteria analysis that we will look into to determine whether there is an issue on the road network that we need to address.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Councillor Bain.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm happy to take the responses via the OCM papers if one can't be provided tonight. Just a couple of questions. I know it's a main roads project, but in the city, it was brought up in the resident survey, the potential pedestrian crossing on Metcalfe Road. Can the city provide an update as to when that might occur?
Metcalfe Road, Linwood.
We'll take that on notice, Mr.
Take that on notice. Thank you. Councillor Bain.
And when does the city anticipate that it will work with Main Roads to make road safety improvements in the Carousel neighbourhood area? And is the partial closure of Station Street part of that?
Director Bowe, you able to?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We're working with Main Roads all the time in relation to road safety and traffic interventions. In relation to the Station Street partial closure, I'll take that on notice as well.
We'll get back to you on that one. Thank you very much. Thank you, councillors. Thank you, Mr. Moore, for joining us. Thank you. We'll move on now, councillors, to EN 026 of 22. The title of the report being Request FM.033.219 for Traffic Management Services. The recommendation is on page 62. Any questions on that item? Thank you. Then we'll move to the next one, being the Strategic Review of Ferndale Reserve. Dr. Sarah McQuaid, the Director of Canning Community, is the responsible officer. It's report number 7.5 on tonight's agenda, CO014 of 22. The recommendation is on page 70 of the agenda and is on screen. Any questions in regards to that item? Councillor Spencer-Teo.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Just wondering, it doesn't seem to be in the report what the age of the infrastructure is down there.
The age of the infrastructure,
Yep.
Dr. McQuaid.
I'll take that on notice and come back to you. I don't have it to
Take that on notice.
Also, if it's been renewed at any stage would be great. Also, curious to find out where Ferndale currently sit on SAM or our draft SIP.
Oh, Dr. McQuaid, sorry.
Thank you, through you. With regards to the SAM modelling, paragraph 25 indicates that where renewal is due to kick in from 23-24 onwards over a 5-year renewal period for the various facilities out there. From a SIP priority point of view, at this stage, as what we've said in the report, we've run it through the criteria. We're still working through the whole of the city's kind of activities, but you know, the general sense that we're getting coming through that modelling is that Ferndale will sit relatively high in the opportunity and the cost benefit to take this one forward. But as we've said, by the time at which the recommendation is that we look at asset renewal, we list the money for consideration in the 23-24 budget. By that point, you'll have the CIS in front of you as well, so that when you're then looking at the budget allocations going forward, you'll have all that data together.
Thank you. Yeah, because I'm trying to do a comparison. So I guess I'm trying to understand if we did a comparison between Rostrata and Ferndale. Obviously, from a SAM point of view, it's very different, and also from a CIS point of view. Sorry. So for this recommendation, have we gone more with SAM or more with CIS?
Dr. McQuaid?
We've gone with CIS. We've gone with the principles of the CIS.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor?
Just with paragraph 12 on the individual entities, with the Riverton Scouts, they didn't relocate in 1985, they relocated in 2001, when the facility where the Riverton Osh is now built was knocked down because the City of Canning would invest in the toilets there. So they relocated to Ferndale Scouts Group when it disappeared. I was just wondering why the report doesn't actually factor in, or I guess comment on, especially with the Linwood Ferndale Football Club, who built the facilities. The Linwood Ferndale Football Club built the facilities. The Riverton Scouts are in the Ferndale Scout facility because they built the facilities. I just think that's important context, as I've raised previously with the formulation of the community infrastructure plan. These are important facts that need to be taken in consideration. Whilst they actually have a kitchen and they have facilities to utilise, they have them because they built them. And when talking to other groups, I think that should be a factor within this consideration and for Council's consideration moving forward.
I think the Deputy Mayor is suggesting that just as a protocol, that might be something the administration could use as a model about the original funding of the building and maybe, the history of upgrades of the facility, so Council has a full overview of all the factors that might help it make a decision. I'm not sure if we need an answer to that, but perhaps we could take that under.
General, we'll take it as noted. I will point out, however, though, that the principle under the CIS of a partnered approach does exactly take into that in terms of what we're considering in our planning. So whilst it's not in the report itself, it's a factor we can add to the table. I'm happy to add it to the AB comment, but it has been factored into the considerations as part of the CIS planning.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor?
Yeah, well, my concern is in making a decision on this and then recognising that the leases will be up for renewal in 2023, which is an administrative position until it comes to council, that hasn't been stated within the report. Moving on to the time, so in terms of progressing this, why does funding feasibility in 2023-24 and then design and forward planning 24-25, why does that all need to be separated to then do the potential construction or changes the following year?
Dr. McQuaid.
Thank you. So the city's planning approach and its allocation of resources works on a process of planning and feasibility in year one, detailed design and costings, because obviously the feasibility and the design then gives us the indication of what the cost is going to be at a high level. We bring that back to council, seek council's endorsement to go forward with that spend. Then we undertake the detailed design, and then that leads us into delivery. We've planned it out that way, as we've indicated. We don't have the resources, either financial or human resources, to undertake the work this financial year. So we would need to kick it in from 23-24. Timelines then can vary depending on how we allocate the resources to the project, but that is our standard process that we follow here.
Deputy Mayor?
Well, there wouldn't be a potential to do funding feasibility and design and forward planning in the 23-24 year, with the recognition that in 25 there's a state and federal election and it might be something that we could attract funding towards?
Dr. McQuaid.
Through you, Mr Mayor. We would need to consider the funding, and that would require a greater funding allocation up front in the 23-24 financial year. But I might ask Ashley McKinnon if he would like to add anything to that discussion around the timelines.
Mr. McKinnon, have you got anything you'd like to add in relation to the potential timeline?
Through the Mayor, no, the timeline is, as Director McQuaid has stated, there are other projects that are currently programmed in on that timeline. It can be extended, but typically, as Director McQuaid has noted, that's our normal planning and delivery cycle.
Thank you, Mr McKinnon. Director McQuaid?
If I may just add to that, I think one of the key points we would need to look at, Deputy Mayor, is what is already planned for the 23, 24 and 24, 25 financial year, because as you're aware, there are already projects in that planning and delivery stage. So it would come down to that capacity as well, and what would that possibly impact on any of those other projects that have already been approved for delivery.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor?
And is with the Riverton Scout Group, given that theirs is mainly towards kitchen and change rooms upgrades and then external storage, ironically, when they got there, they had the canoes in their garage, so I'm not sure why they've got a room issue. They used to have canoes, sorry. Are they able to seek external funding or look for external funding to do kitchen upgrades and toilet upgrades
Director
in the
McQuaid?
meantime, given I guess the majority of it is towards the pavilion and club rooms?
I think the detailed planning and design will consider all the needs across it. It's not saying that we wouldn't look at the Scouts. We would hope to work with all parties involved to see if we can secure external resources to support it. The question would come down to, again, timing and who's being expected to project manage and deliver that. If it's the city, we would need to consider that in the context. But yes, we would be talking to each of the clubs through this next phase. And why we've brought this report to council now in the way that we have broken down is because we've taken it as far as we can take it. We need that direction now, whether council are supportive of us going down this route of renewal or another option before we start progressing any further discussions with the independent groups who use the reserve.
Thank you, Director. Any other questions, councillors, before we wind it up? Councillor Parkinson, yes, go ahead.
Through the Mayor, just on recommendation number 3, is that $10,000 the actual cost of the temporary storage container? Or if I recall, we were talking in previous SIPs and so forth, 30K? So just a question, is that 10K the actual cost of that storage container?
Ashley, Mr McKinnon, I'll ask you.
Through the Mayor to Councillor Parkinson, a typical storage container in its most basic form with security and safety provision is around $10,000, as indicated. The modular storage unit that we have provided, which is an upgraded version, is considerably more in cost, around the $25,000 to $30,000 mark.
Thank you. Councillor Jacobs?
One question, thanks, Mr.
Yes.
Mayor. Is there a reason why this area's been, in my opinion, maybe some other residents' opinion, neglected by council over, say, the last 20, 30 years?
You'd be in the best position to answer that since you're on the council.
Well, I say in my opinion, I don't want to,
I don't think we can answer that. I mean, you're asking for an opinion. We can't give you an opinion.
Oh, okay, has the area been neglected?
Well, that would be subject to, that would be a subjective answer. We can't answer whether we feel it's been neglected.
Funding-wise?
Director Kane? Yeah, I don't think we can answer that. We can't answer questions that ask for an opinion, that's all. Director?
Thank you. And as been previously pointed out to councillors for the last decade, there has been a significant underinvestment in the city's facilities and buildings. And that's the decision this council's now recognised to rectify with its decisions in a long-term financial plan. We are some $30 million behind in the degree of update of our facilities.
And that's a fair comment. And just in relation to that, I mean, we're now looking at upgrades of existing buildings rather than probably completely renewing buildings with new builds. I mean, we're trying to, spread the money as far as wide as we possibly can. We're investing in pretty much every ward of the city quite extensively, but we are not really doing anything more than renewing at the moment and catching up where we were when we became a council in 2015. And at that time, you would remember, Jess, we had told there'd been a massive underinvestment in renewal of cities' facilities, and we're still catching up to the tune of millions of dollars. And Ferndale Reserve is one example of yet another one of our many, many facilities that just has not seen the investment probably that it should. But we're getting to it, and we will get to it. Any other questions, councillors? Thank you. We'll move on to the next item, which is notices of motion for consideration at the OCM. It's NOM 011 of 22, feasibility study, multi-level car park, Canning City Centre. Notice of motion has been submitted. It's on page 84 of the agendas. Is there any questions in relation to that last item? Deputy?
Does the city actually have any potential land holdings, or I guess if it was, the norm was adopted, we'd look at potential ones, but do we have any land holdings that could be considered?
Who can I ask to answer that question? CEO.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thanks for the question, Deputy Mayor. Look, there are not a lot of city-owned land holdings in this space, but that is part of the work that the feasibility will identify, whether there is whether we can get access to other available land in and around the city centre or the rail stations.
Thank you, Deputy.
And just last one, with respect to the commentary or about the existing budget and possible costs for this, and then even if we identify land holdings, would that be municipal funding, or would that actually come out of the quarantined, built into the plan for the city centre project?
CEO.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think the intent is for this to be a revenue-generating opportunity for the city. So how we would choose to fund a multi-storey car park, if it was feasible, would be work that we would need to do to best articulate that. So it's not anticipated that this would come out of the pool of funds that have been identified for the city centre development or per se. But as I said, my understanding is that the intent is that this is revenue generating.
Deputy Mayor.
Sorry, just to clarify, when commentary about whether it's possible, it would be debt funded. The city centre project obviously has its own mechanism for funding. If we were to produce something like that, it couldn't be funded through that, because it was a revenue generating. It would come from outside of that program, even though it's in the city centre project, city centre area.
CEO.
No, I think I'm not saying that we can't fund it the same way that we are funding the city centre project, but the rates quarantining model that we've put together and that is supporting the city centre project is there specifically to deal with the redevelopment of the infrastructure to support the city centre. But again, all of these are things that will be thrashed out through the development of the feasibility study.
Thank you. Councillor Singh, you had your hand up, and then I'll come to Councillor Jacobs.
Thank you,
Councillor
Mr.
Singh.
Mayor. Question for CEO. Are we looking to spend any funds on this feasibility study, or is it just internal resources doing the study?
CEO.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Initially, the feasibility study will just be an internal review. So we'll use our expertise and our resources internally. Obviously, if the feasibility stacks up, that we'd be pushing through to a business case development. That would probably require some external resources.
Thank you. Councillor Jacobs.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Is this similar, or I suppose it is similar but different? From my memory, a few years ago, did you have a motion for some similar idea? Was it at Cannington train station?
That was when Optus Stadium was ready to be put online, and I felt there was an opportunity at the time to put outdoor parking there for stadium use, and I guess in hindsight that wasn't supported by council, but this is a completely different proposition. I just think at the moment there's so much pressure in there for parking. That's why we're looking at it. It's just a feasibility study. It's not costing us anything other than internal time and effort, and we'll see where it goes from there.
Obviously, you'd be charging. Do we envisage charging for the parking? And then would that have a flow-on effect? If we start charging for parking, will everyone say, okay, the council's charging for parking, Carousel charges for parking, and then before we know it, we've lost our our competitive advantage in attracting people to come and park with us rather than going to the city and cop a fine?
Yeah, I can probably answer that only because I put the nom. My view on that, and I'll ask the CEO to comment as well, is that I don't think we've got a strategic advantage there. Frankly, there's almost nowhere for anyone to park free in the city centre. There's so many restrictions on parking in that area, and really the only parking is either to go to Bunnings and they won't let you park there unless you're actually a shopper, or to pay for parking at Westfield Carousel. So unless you're a shopper, you can't use it. So there's and also there's paid parking at the train station. That's also paid parking. So this is to provide, in my view, a service for the community, really, to allow people to park there. If they can't find parking, they have to park somewhere. Victoria Park has parking, but this is just an option. I think we need to look at enterprises that are beneficial to our residents, and we can't rely on rates forever. I mean, we need to look at other enterprises. Yes, Jesse.
One more, and then I'll let you be.
No, go.
So in the notes, it mentions Joondalup, and look, I go up there and park there when I go to do some interpreting jobs up there in the courthouse and whatever. It's very good. It's got a little electric charging bay. It's fantastic. But apart from the Joondalup example, and I know that the City of Perth do it, they've got a whole heap of car parks, but in our level tier of government, apart from Joondalup, is there anybody else? I mean, Stirling, are they doing anything like that? I just want to know, is this something that councils are moving towards, or is this an outer lie thing? I mean, it's not
I'll
really
ask the
something.
CEO to comment on Stirling. I don't know. As far as we've always been, the whole reason we're spending nearly $85 million on the city centre is develop it as the CBD of the Perth South East, and of course Joondalup has always positioned itself as the Perth CBD of the northeast corridors, north corridor. So I guess we're highly comparative. Stirling, I don't know. Is there a need in Stirling? I'm not sure if they have a city centre as we do. CEO?
Yeah, look, thank you, Mr Mayor. Speaking on behalf of, or to City of Stirling, they do have a paid parking strategy. Predominantly at the moment it is at-grade car parking to service their industrial precinct. But I'm well aware that they have a paid parking strategy that seeks to look at how it might lever or leverage parking demand in particular precincts. Obviously, there are other areas that have multi-storey car parks. Fremantle is another. But regardless, the purpose of the feasibility is to explore all of these avenues and to bring back a fairly robust review that gives you some comfort that it will either stack up financially or the mechanism within which it will. So all of these are great questions, but will be answered through the FISO.
One more thing. I think Fremantle demolished their car park about 2 years ago with the development of the library. Is that?
I don't think so. I think
Could we check?
No, the multi-storey car park's still there. That hasn't moved.
Still there?
Yeah.
That's owned by the council.
Thank you. Any other questions, councillors, before we wind up for the evening? Thank you for your attendance. Urgent business, there is none tonight. Confidential matters at item 10, there is none. Closure, there's no further business. I declare the agenda briefing closed this evening. It's now 7:47 p.m. and I thank everyone for their attendance. Thank you, councillors. And thank you, staff.